My name is Chris Cole, and I am the EVP of Operations here at ATG. Super excited today to be bringing one of our newest partnerships to you guys, Panzura. I am joined by Petra Davidson, which is the VP of Marketing for Panzura. So she's going to walk through what the solution is and what the value it can bring to your organization. So really excited about this new partnership, and couldn't wait to get this scheduled and get it on the calendar to let you guys know how this can help, especially in the world we are in today with all of the remote work. So Petra will walk through the presentation. If you have questions during the presentation, please put those in either the chat window or in the question and answer section, and I will make sure that I get those marked down. And as Petra finishes up the presentation today, we can get those answered. But super excited about adding this to our full stack of solutions for AEC customers. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Petra.
All right, thanks, Chris. And hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. So Panzura is, as you saw, the fastest global cloud file system on the planet. So let's start this presentation by digging in for a couple of minutes to our current and traditional file systems to set the scene so you understand how different Panzura is. So the situation we're all used to is having local storage, and local storage works on a single site. And the reason we all have local storage is that it's exceptionally slow to be able to access it from anywhere other than the location that it's at. So depending on the size of the business that you run, this could be a server in your building itself, or you might have servers in a data center, some kind of a colo facility, and you'll run a big data pipe into those so that all of your people have fast access to the files and the content that they need to work with. Now, along with those traditional file systems comes a whole bunch of technology that we have come to take for granted. And it's the technology that helps your people to work together without overwriting each other and without creating versions of files, messing up somebody else's work. And that's where little features like file locking come into play. So all of that has been with us now for near on 30 years. So we've become used to it. It's part of the wallpaper. None of this works when you start to create different locations. So the further away people get from their data, the slower it is for them to access it. So the way we've got around this as companies have grown is to create data storage that's local to each of those locations. And that gives every user a fast experience, but it means that you have to replicate your data for every single one of those locations. And obviously you sensibly have things like backup and then other off-site copies for disaster recovery, which all means that you end up with a phenomenal amount of data that you're trying to store. And a whole lot of it is sheer duplication. So all of this starts to become exceptionally expensive. And of course, people can't work collaboratively between locations. They have to send files to each other. They can't log in and access a file that's held centrally, because if they try to do that, you're back to latency getting in the way. So shuffle forward a little bit. Cloud has been with us for about 10 odd years now. The cloud is the ideal place to put your data. It's the place that has the capacity to cope with the volume of data that we're now producing. But again, it puts your data further away from your users. And so working with it in real time is slow. So it's not a matter of simply picking up your data storage, putting it in the cloud and carrying on as normal. So that means that companies that have tried to do this often end up using the cloud for long-term retention or DR backup, something like that. A lot of companies that have tried to move workflows to the cloud have actually backed them out again because it happens to be too slow. So that's the scenario that we have right now. Panzura turns that cloud storage into a high-performance file system. So it lets you, no matter how many locations you have, use the cloud in the way that you probably want to, like it's a data center that's globally available that you can access with local type performance. Now, let's take a moment to give you a look at what a global cloud file system looks like. So here we've got an example with 3 locations. It happens to be New York, London, and the third one is a cloud region. So Panzura can operate either on physical premises or simply within a cloud region that's near to your users. Now you can see we operate what we call a hub-spoke and mesh approach. So the hub is the cloud storage, and that's a single data source. It's your authoritative data source. The spokes are each of the locations that you have, and with Panzura you can have an unlimited number of locations without losing any performance. And then the mesh, that ring around the outside, means that each of those locations don't have to talk to each other via the cloud. They can actually talk to each other directly. And that'll become important a little bit later when we talk about things like file locking and immediate data consistency. So, and lastly, you can see in this diagram that every one of these locations has an exact copy of your entire file system. Now, what that means in Panzura terms is not that the data is replicated on each of those locations. It means that we separate out the metadata. That's the data about the data. It's the things that talk about when the file was created, who created the file, who's got it open for editing, how big the file is, when it was last accessed, all of that stuff. So every location has a complete copy of that metadata, and they also have a cached copy of the data that you use most often, stored in the most cost-effective way, with storing as minimal data as possible. And that means that whenever changes are made, we're shipping just a small amount of data into the cloud. We immediately ship those change data to all of those other locations. And if any location needs to be able to see changes that have been made before we sync to the cloud, then that location can communicate directly with the location that last altered the file and draw down the changes. So that's a very quick overview of what this system looks like. So in practical terms, what does Panzura do? It doesn't matter how many locations you have. It could just be a handful, it could be many. And they could be focused regionally, or they could be spread across the entire globe. So you get one authoritative data source. So immediately you've collapsed down your data storage by often up to 70%. You get one file system that is automatically resilient, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. Your IT team gets one security policy to implement and oversee. They get one view over the entire file network. And every user, regardless of where they are, gets that same enterprise-grade file performance, which basically means it's fast. So we talked a little bit about the technology that comes with the single-site network-attached storage. Panzura replicates that at land speed globally, no matter how many locations you have. And that means that you get your automatic global file locking. So the moment any user in your network opens a file to edit it, it's locked for editing to everybody else. They can open a read-only copy, but they can't open an editable copy. The exception to that is when you're using applications that allow byte range locking, like Revit. So Panzura supports that as well. That means that whenever a user is working on a portion of a Revit project, that is locked, and others can work on other parts of the same project. They cannot collide and overwrite each other's work though. The second thing is we give you immediate global data consistency. So as I mentioned, every location syncs change data to the cloud simultaneously every 60 seconds. So there's never any delay. Every location syncs at the same time. If any location needs a copy of a file that's been changed before that sync runs, it goes and gets it from the location that last had it open. And the last thing is we give you local file operation performance. So that just means files open as fast as if they were stored locally. We don't open them any faster than that. If it's a small Word file, it'll open straight up. If it's an enormous Revit project, it'll take the length of time that it would take stored locally to open. What it does mean, though, is that it overcomes latency that particularly affects Revit and your other CAD applications, so that no matter how far away your users are, they get a workable file experience, a fast file experience. The last thing we give you is an entirely new approach to backup and disaster recovery. So just talk a bit about the cloud again for a moment. So the cloud object store does not store your files as files. It breaks them into blocks of data, object blocks. And so what that means is we are able to, when a file is changed, we don't have to sync the entire file to the cloud and back again. We simply sync the blocks that have changed. The way that we store those blocks is as immutable data blocks. So as you're going on, you are storing a consistent number of blocks that are stored as immutable data that cannot be changed. And so rather than having to run a separate backup process on a regular schedule and having to restore an entire backup if you have some kind of data loss or some kind of a disaster, you can simply restore the blocks that you need from snapshots that have been taken. So you can take, for example, you could restore a file that was snapshotted sometime yesterday. You pick up the exact snapshot that you need, that file within the snapshot, and restore it. So what that means is you don't have to replicate your data in the way that you've used to have to give you that resilience. The cloud is so durable and object block storage is so durable that we can give you more resilience than what you ever had without you having to store sometimes up to 5 copies of your data in order to achieve that. So Panzura has some specific benefits for the AEC industry. Your firms tend to collaborate across large distances, and the applications that you use give you a particular problem when you do that. And they're Revit, Civil 3D, SolidWorks, and the other applications that are commonly used in your industry. The reason for that is that working with those applications requires multiple file operations. So opening a file or saving a file is not just a matter of sending one message to the cloud or the controller and getting one message back. With Revit, it's something like 15,000 file operations. And so as soon as you introduce latency into that equation, you start to get horrendously slow file open times. And there's no amount of bandwidth that you can throw at that problem to solve it. It's the latency itself, the delay between the instruction actually even starting, that starts to slow you down. So Panzura overcomes that latency. And if you think back to that file network diagram, the reason we can do that is that we're storing a file very, very close to where your people are. And so we're cutting down latency by an enormous degree. So that means we can open Revit files in seconds rather than sometimes 20, 30, even 40 minutes. We've had customers report to us before they move to Panzura. We also give you that real-time automatic file locking or byte range locking, if that's what you work with, and that global data consistency, so that you can use your design talent wherever it is. People can jump in at short notice into a project. It gives you much better outcomes and much faster outcomes. So we have many stories to tell in the AEC industry, but I thought this one in particular would probably resonate. So the CNS companies, they have nearly 500 people, 21 locations spread across the USA. They use Revit, Civil 3D, Bentley MicroStation. When they first came to Panzura, they were struggling massively with file open problems for Revit. It was a matter of people would start to open a file, go and have a lunch break. If they were lucky, the file would be ready to use when they got back. So we managed to cut down their remote file open times by nearly 100%, which was phenomenal. So not only does that allow their people to work together collaboratively, it has the impact of changing their entire company culture. So you no longer get this feel of there are those in head office and then the second-class citizens everywhere else. Everybody's truly part of the same company. We managed to reduce their storage footprint to the extent that, that they were saving about $100,000 every single year. And so by installing Panzura, they actually said we let them punch above their weight, because even though they're not the largest firm out there, they can bring all of the right people into a project, bid on it, and know that they can confidently deliver it without having to move everybody into the same place. And this is a common thread throughout all of the AEC companies that we have on Panzura. So I'm going to run now through a few of the reasons why you would choose Panzura. So if these ring a bell, this is probably an indication that maybe you should be talking to us or our new partner. So the first one is you've got network attached storage and you have it at multiple sites, which means that you've probably got a whole lot of duplication in your data. So we can consolidate that storage. We also replace your backup, your disaster recovery, any file sync and share like Dropbox that you're running into one resilient file system. And as I said before, we don't make you replicate your data to achieve that resiliency. So we typically would save people up to about 70% of their data storage footprint. And we would also consolidate storage infrastructure by up to about 90%. So these are significant savings depending on your situation. Obviously, the more locations you have, the more duplicated data that you have. So next thing, if you're tired of managing those multiple data sets. So again, not only have you got duplicated data, you're having to actually manage whether that data storage is working, whether your backups are working at each of your locations. So a couple of notes on the way that we deduplicate data. So I mentioned that we change data into data blocks, and we deduplicate it at the 128 kilobit block level. So that means that we're not looking at an entire file, we're looking at the blocks of data within the file, locating the duplicates and stripping them out. So no longer do you have a file that's called doc. You have a series of data blocks that we can look at and say, okay, block A, B, and C are duplicates, block D is not a duplicate. Therefore, we would store those for 4 blocks. So you can start to see how easily we can strip out the amount of data that you need to store overall. So here's an obvious one. If you're using CAD applications, Panzura is definitely something that you should look at. And particularly if you have people who are working remotely, as we currently do. I'll talk about that for a moment as well. So as we have people who are not just working in remote offices, they're working from home, we can stand up filers, Panzuras, in cloud locations that are near where they are and almost entirely overcome the latency problem. There will still be some friction depending on the speed of individuals' internet connections, but if we can get a filer in a cloud location that's very close to where most of those people live, we can still allow people to work remotely in a very high performance environment. There are some cases where you might need to install a virtual desktop in order to overcome that last bit of latency. But for firms as large as Gensler, we've been able to let their people work remotely all around the world simply by putting filers in local cloud regions. Okay, another thing that you obviously need, you cannot afford to wait for minutes for data to show up. Now, depending on the solution you choose, you can end up with a scenario where, for one client, for example, had something like 35 sites. They were waiting for 45 minutes for data to become consistent across all of those sites. So our hub, spoke, and mesh approach allows you to have that immediate data consistency. So, and again, we're not shipping unnecessary data around. If a location on one coast of the US doesn't need to see data immediately, we will wait until the 60 seconds, until the cloud, until we sync to the cloud. However, if you need it immediately, we will serve it up to you. Another place where you might find Panzura very useful is if you're currently working on BIM 360. And you can see here exactly where the overlap is between Panzura and BIM 360. These two work beautifully together as complementary products. So BIM 360 will give you collaboration on Revit only with external contractors, whereas Panzura is focused on delivering collaboration within your network. So you wouldn't use Panzura in that situation, but you certainly would use BIM 360. If you were looking to economize on BIM 360 licenses, you could therefore have Panzura to do most of the job and then focus the BIM 360 licenses on those people, on those users who need to be collaborating with external contractors, rather than using it as your entire solution. A couple of other notes about BIM 360. It's limited to one cloud, whereas Panzura gives you the cloud of your choice. The next thing we do is we take protecting your intellectual property very, very seriously. So we run military-grade encryption over your data when it's stored in the cloud. So that's over and above the security that the cloud storage has itself. We also protect it by encrypting it as it is in transit between the filers and the cloud. So, and also the data is compressed before we move it, which means that even if it were able to be intercepted, it is exceptionally difficult, if not impossible, to de-encrypt it and actually read it. Another amazing point about Panzura is the ability to minimize your disaster risk. So you read daily stories of companies being hit by ransomware, and it's only going to get worse from here on in. The way that we store your data snapshots, again as immutable data, means that they cannot be subject to ransomware. So you can just shrug off an attack. Now let me just show you a little bit of what this looks like. So as you change data, when we run our sync to the cloud every 60 seconds, we are moving change data into the cloud. And we are not overwriting what's in the cloud with that data. We store it as brand new data. The data that is already there is stored as immutable data. And so even if you are subjected to a ransomware attack, your snapshots cannot be affected, they cannot be changed. Your encrypted files, the files that are now encrypted with ransomware, get stored in the cloud as brand new cloud objects. So they don't touch what's already in there. That means that overcoming a ransomware attack is simply a matter of reverting back to the previous uninfected snapshot, however far back that needs to be. So if you catch this attack fast, you might lose a couple of minutes worth of data. And your time to restore all of this is potentially going to be less than an hour. Now I say that, it depends on your exact situation, but we have had frequently customers who have had under an hour's worth of downtime, very little data loss versus the alternative. True story, we recently had a customer affected by a ransomware attack. Not all of their data was in Panzura. So the attackers first took out their Windows snapshots. So all of the data that wasn't in Panzura effectively was lost and subject to that ransomware. The data that was in Panzura was able to be restored virtually instantaneously and without a cent of ransom being paid. Now, this is not just about ransomware, of course. It doesn't have to be a malicious attack. The same sort of thing will guard you if somebody accidentally deletes a file, if some of your data gets corrupted. Any of those scenarios, which would mean traditionally that you would have to look at restoring from a previous backup and overwriting a whole lot of data, simply means that we can go back and grab from an unaffected snapshot, even down to the file level. We can restore a file or a folder or even the entire file system if you need to from a snapshot. It's a very clean and easy process. You just need Panzura support to help you out with it. And our support runs 24/7. So there are a whole lot of companies choosing Panzura, and I've got here, logos from a variety of industries. There's everybody from large, medium AEC firms, manufacturing firms, to government departments themselves, and the AEC contractors who work with government departments. So this is a system that's been battle tested and is proven to be not only fast, but as secure as it needs to be to comply with some of the most stringent regulations. We offer you a few different deployment options that come with different pricing models. So if you have, for example, just one site, there is a Panzura archive option for you. So obviously this doesn't come with file locking, it doesn't need to. You're simply replacing your network attached storage. If you run multiple locations that you're looking to just consolidate into an authoritative data source in the cloud, we can eliminate your replication, deduplicate your data, put that into Panzura and cut down massively on your storage. And finally, which is where most AEC firms land, is our collaboration offer. And that's the one that allows you to work like everybody's in the same room, regardless of where they are. So that's where you get your file locking, your immediate data consistency across whatever distance you need it to be. And we overlay this with a product called Vision.ai, which is a dashboard that lets you search, audit, and monitor. And the fascinating thing about Vision.ai is that it can save and has saved literally thousands of IT hours every year for firms looking for things like unauthorized access to files, looking to find files that have been renamed or moved. It's a very, very powerful search tool that looks across any and all of your data, regardless of where it is, and just allows you to find files where you may previously have had to spend hours searching through syslog files to find a file event. It'll find it in seconds. And that is Panzura. Chris, I'll hand back over to you.
Good stuff. I appreciate you walking through that. Very informative. So several questions came up during the presentation. So I'll start with the first one I got. If one site has been working on a file that another site, which has not accessed before, needs to access it, will it have to be pulled from the central data store first prior to caching, or can you cache ahead if you know you're going to need a certain file in the future?
You can cache ahead. So yes, you're right. There's two different processes here. One is the first time a file is pulled down, and then as soon as that is cached, then your access is exceptionally fast. The way that we compress data before we move it means that it is not a huge operation to pull the file down in the first place, though. So it's not that you'll be waiting hours for data to show up by any means, even if it is the first time that you've accessed it.
Awesome. Mike, did that answer your question? I will assume it did, but please comment if it did not. Perfect, thanks, Mike. Second question is, do you map a virtual drive in the cloud, or do you access your data on your local drive and it pulls the data from the cloud?
Good question. Okay, so Within the cloud, essentially what we are mimicking is a Windows file system. And so you're essentially mapping to a network drive, just in the same way as you would if you were working off your local NAS.
Awesome. Marcus, did that answer your question? And then while Marcus is responding to us on that, Petra, let's talk about pricing for a second. Joel asked how we can get pricing. Walk me through just the basic pricing model if you can, and roundabout costs for a firm looking to get this implemented in their organization.
Okay, tell you what, I won't try and give you costs because it's one of those it depends situations. So whatever figures I gave you could never be right. But let me talk you through the model. So we price on a subscription basis. The basis for pricing is the amount of data under management. And we look for contracts of, you can sign for a year or even up to 5 years. All of those things affect your pricing. The next thing that affects pricing is those options that we just ran through, whether you're just looking at archive for a single site, storage for multiple sites, or collaboration. And we don't right now, but we will very shortly, I think, be able to automatically split between those file options. So we minimize your costs at every step. So you can start to see why I can't give you exact pricing, because it depends on how much data you have and how much is being used in each of those different ways. The other thing that our subscription includes is, with each package, a number of virtual machines. These days we tend to operate VMs. Back in the day we would have sold you hardware. But we operate VMs, which means that you have always got a high-powered machine available. We don't let you run your critical business data on something that can become end of life and we can't easily replace. So you come with an entitlement of virtual machines, and we tend to give you an entitlement that's slightly larger than what you might think that you need, because in cases where, as I mentioned, you might end up with people even working remotely in parts of the country where you don't have a filer, that gives you the opportunity to stand up a VM in a cloud region that's very nearby, so you can include them in your high performance network. So those are predominantly the things that come within the subscription, and support, obviously. So our support runs 24/7, 365 days a year.
Awesome. So we got several questions here to pop up. How often are snapshots taken?
Okay, so a couple of different answers to that. When we run our sync to the cloud, we're snapshotting data changes at each of those locations. So that's one set of snapshots. The snapshot of your data stored in the cloud is configurable. So every client can choose what it is that works for them. We have financial institutions running those every few seconds because they cannot afford to lose even the tiniest amount of data. We have companies running them once daily, twice daily. It's entirely up to you. I guess another point about those snapshots is that they are not resource intensive snapshots. So it is not going to take up a whole bunch of processing power and slowing you down whilst they run. It's certainly not like running a full backup. And so it's, as I said, it's entirely up to what works for you. If you simply can't afford to lose any data, then you can run them more frequently.
Okay. So Corey asked, how does this compare to Windows SharePoint Sync? And he says they're accessing it from a local drive pulled from the cloud.
Okay, I would say they're two different things. SharePoint Sync is not going to give you file locking and collaboration to the same extent.
Okay. So then we've got Billy, Matt Lynn, has Panzura been tested as a point cloud host for Revit links?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, so we'll take that one We'll take that one offline.
Yeah,
So
do please.
I'll mark that one down. Good. Matt Lynn gets a point for stuffing the presenting.
He does.
Yeah, he's a smart guy. I know that guy. Yeah. So let's see. Billy Schrader, does Panzura support linked Revit files? Would this require any change in workflow?
We do not require changes to workflow. It's one of the greatest things about Panzura is that we are essentially replicating a Windows network. So however your Windows network works is how Panzura will work, with your data stored in the cloud as that single authoritative data source.
Awesome. Steve asks, do we have to buy hardware from Panzura for on-prem cache?
You do not.
Okay.
You can choose to if you wish. Otherwise, we can provide you with specs if you wish to have hardware on-prem, alternatively virtual machines.
Okay. Mike wants to know how much data can be cached at each location and what is the optimum amount of capacity to have within Panzura at each site? 10% of total, 25%, so on, so on.
That's another one I can't give you a good answer to. If we can take that offline too, that'd be great. And I say this only, I will have to ask one of our sales engineers who will know it immediately and laugh at me for not knowing it.
That's what salespeople do. Location. Cool. Billy wants to know how regional are cloud regions? Are there potential geographic limitations? And Billy's coming from middle of Missouri. That helps out at all.
Got it. Okay. So with Panzura, you can use the cloud provider, any cloud provider that you choose. So that might be AWS, it might be Microsoft Azure, it might be Google. We can let you run VMs in whatever cloud and whatever cloud region you need to. So even if your primary cloud storage provider is AWS, for example, if it's Google that has a cloud region that's closest to the location you need it, we can stand up a VM in that Google cloud region. It doesn't have to be the same cloud provider as you're using for your storage.
Perfect. Cool. Just a question from me, Petra. Real simply, there's lots of different solutions out there these days for managing all the different project files. Autodesk has a few. What is, if you were to give it one sentence, what is the Panzura difference? What's the value that Panzura can provide to our customers?
It's immediate data consistency. That is the one thing that determines whether your people can very effectively collaborate, no matter where they are. And with that immediacy actually comes file locking. They go hand in hand. If there's slowness in making data consistent, that is having the exact same data show up in every single location, then typically you find that file locking doesn't work the way that you expect it to either. So the difference for us is being able to allow customers to truly work collaboratively. And what the business outcome tends to be a mix of these things. So one is vastly reduced times waiting for files to open. So your people end up being far more productive. It means saving IT time, not having to merge file changes together because you've ended up with a couple of versions because people have needed to work on different versions of files. And it also means, essentially it means you hit your deadlines faster, you deliver better outcomes because you're not constrained in the people that you can pull in. So if you have an expert that you need for a particular project, and they're not in a place where they can easily access your data, then you're effectively constrained from using that expertise. We let you bring the expertise to your projects, no matter where your people are.
No, that's a good recap. Billy asked a good question. He said, looking at cost effectiveness, is this a viable solution for individual remote workers, or would you say it's more geared towards remote office locations?
Okay, so first thing, it's certainly not an individual
Okay.
approach. This is an enterprise file system. Um, it has been it's been deployed very cost effectively for even firms that are small enough to have a single location. And it's now, there's one in particular that springs to mind, went from one office to effectively 175 offices as his people all went home. So it's working in a scenario like that. It's certainly not something that an individual one-man band would use. In that case, you would be better off with a much cheaper solution, of which there are many. So the multiple location thing is one thing that I would look at, and that that potentially takes us out of contention for very small firms. If you have less than 25 terabytes of data in total, for example, Panzura isn't the option that you would go for. You would go for something that requires less expense and probably less collaboration.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody for your time this afternoon. I know we're all busy people. So Petra, thank you so much for the presentation. I really enjoyed it personally and learned a lot. So good stuff. If you guys have any questions on the webinar, feel free to reach out to any of us. You can reach out at sales@atgusa.com. We'll definitely get back to you. But thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to talking to you soon.